This week I actually got to play Planet Coaster 2, so I thought I'd make a video on my honest feedback of my time with the game. Frontier invited me to an event where I got to play 2 hours of the game, in which I spent about half my time playing one of the new career challenges, and the other half playing my favourite mode, Sandbox. So I thought I'd summarise all of my opinions into this video of what I thought of Planet Coaster 2 and provide some feedback, so you all can see what I thought of the game and also Frontier can improve some parts, which to be honest might be quite difficult because I really enjoyed my time with this game. From the little time I had with it, I feel like I can create a pretty solid opinion already that this is a great game. Over the past few years, especially games that have been developed over COVID, most of them, after launch, feel very lacking in a lot of departments. Whether that's a big drop in content over the previous game, a poorly built game that just feels very underdeveloped, or it's just a complete laggy mess that runs terribly. But I can honestly say in my little time with the game, I never felt any of these opinions. Even in its alpha state, the game feels solid and nearly complete too. Really just a few tweaks here and there and this game could be literally perfect. And it's pretty much exactly what we asked for as well. Firstly, I think it's very clear that Frontier have been listening to the fans. Over the past however many years, there's been so many speculation videos on a potential Planet Coaster 2 and a lot of wish lists as to what we all want from the game. Even I thought of making one, but then when I was contacted by Frontier to be a part of this whole creator program, I decided against it because it didn't really feel like the right thing to do. But now that I've had hands-on with the game and I know pretty much everything that we can expect from launch, I'm so excited. Granted that we did only get to play the alpha version of the game, but still, if the alpha is this impressive, just imagine what the full game will be like. Yes, I keep seeing loads of comments about why is this coaster not in, why is that feature not in, but just remember, it's an alpha. Not every feature is going to be in this version of the game. We really do need to wait until the full game's release to form a full opinion on it. But from the little time I had with the game, here's what I thought. Firstly, the positives and where to begin. Now, I looked at the game in my gameplay session as strictly a coaster builder, so that was the main thing I focused on. Once I had the career mode challenge out the way, it was all coasters for me from then on. I looked at every coaster in the game and very extensively looked at the new ones, and I had a great time doing this. There's some absolutely fantastic new additions to this game. If you want to see the management side of the game, the theming and scenery pieces, and basically all the other aspects that I didn't cover, then I can recommend these channels that are on screen now. They've done excellent videos on all aspects of that I didn't cover, so go give them a watch. But what did I like? Pretty much everything. To be honest, I was quite easy to please with coasters. They could have added 1 or 2 new ones, but the actual volume of new ones that we got, I was quite surprised, considering, like I said, that this is still the alpha. I have a feeling there's more yet to be announced about the launch of the game, including a few more coasters and definitely the dark rides, but from what we got in the alpha, I was very happy. The collection of new coasters that we had felt pretty polished. Yes, they had a couple of visual bugs, but apart from that, there were some really solid new additions. I think everyone's new favourite coaster, me included, is going to be the Outer Max Multiverse coasters. I'd say I spent more than half of my time in the sandbox mode playing with this friction wheel variant. The potential that new models like this can add to our coaster building is going to be just revolutionary. The level of detail and realism and creativity that we're now going to be able to put into some of our layouts is going to be incredible, and I just can't wait to see what the community creates with new things like this. It was fun to see a few completely unexpected additions as well. There was a lot of coasters in this gameplay that I didn't expect to be able to have a go with, purely just because I didn't really think they were going to be added into the game. I expected a few new additions, but I really thought these would be modern coasters, so to see some surprising new older style coasters as well was really good. As far as the performance goes with the game, I didn't have a single issue. Mine ran really smoothly. And like I said, with this being an alpha, I'm sure any issues that other people had would probably be ironed out towards launch. And I say that with confidence because I have confidence in this game. There hasn't really been anything that we've been shown so far that's made me worried. Everything feels like a natural progression, Planet Coaster 1, whether it be adding more detail, more refinements and new features. And I have to say, they've done a really good job with all of this. When it comes to purely looking at the coasters, this game so far has done all it needs to for me. And I say that with expecting more coaster types to come to the game, but the ones we have are great. It's nice to see Frontier really experimenting, and personally feels like they're going out of the comfort zone a bit with these coasters, which is good. It's nice to see that this experimentation is taking them to like really exciting elements with some of these rides. Like, I did expect to be able to experiment with the drop track and maybe a switch track, but the fact that we've got like tilt tracks and omnimover tracks and all sorts going on was really surprising. And especially the tilt track model that's been created for this, you can tell the developers have taken a lot of time to look at the really detailed real life versions, and to be able to so well replicate them in Planet Coaster is very impressive. You can tell that with these new models, they've been designed with a lot of love. Also, with the improvements to the on-ride camera and the smoothing, the coasters just feel better than they've ever done before. Like I've said, if you want to see feedback on the management, scenery and other stuff to do with the game, then I'd look at the creators I mentioned earlier, as I purely looked at just the coasters, because that was mainly what I was interested in. But obviously when the full game releases, I'll look at all aspects of it. And if you want to see a more detailed look as to what I thought of the exclusive gameplay event, the coasters, and every coaster that's actually in the game as well, then watch the videos that I posted a couple of days ago on your screen now. Talking in terms of graphical upgrades as well, I think the new game looks stunning. About halfway through my gameplay session, I did actually ask to turn the depth of field mode off, which I could, purely just because I don't really like the way it looks, especially when coaster building, and when I did this, the game felt a lot more clear, sharp and refined, which was good. So if you're watching other creators' gameplay and wondering why it looks a bit blurry, that's because this setting was on by default. Especially when it comes to the lighting and how it interacts with different surfaces and the water, it just looks so much better. I know that the game's engine has had some graphical improvements since, as we saw in Planet Zoo, but this just feels like even a step above that. I know it's probably quite hard to see this from some of the gameplay because we were playing in very much a top-down camera angle, just like messing around with scenery and coasters and stuff, but when you actually look at the different times of day against water and how it interacts with the landscaping and everything, it just looks beautiful. The game does also support NVIDIA Reflex low latency, which is brilliant because especially if you've got a slightly lesser powered PC than it would be ideal for Planet Coaster, this will just help your game feel so much more responsive. And it also supports DLSS and the AMD equivalent as well, which is going to boost the performance of people's games so much and will be especially helpful in those larger park builds. And the last thing I want to mention out of all these positive things as well is the sound design. It feels like it's had such a much needed overhaul, which is great to see. Well, here. From when I was experimenting with the different coasters, moving around the UI, even placing down items, it just sounded so much more clear, crisp and realistic. There's so many more positive things I want to say about the game, but also stuff that's been mentioned by a lot of other creators too, so I won't delve too much more into that, otherwise I'd be here for hours. But now let's have a look at some stuff that I would like to see improved with the game before its release. Firstly, one of the things that I kind of struggled with on the event was definitely the game's UI. And I do think a lot of this is down to the fact that it's just new and different and in a different layout, so it'll probably be something we get used to. But it does really seem like some things are a little bit less intuitive than they could be. Like when you press the coaster building button, it launches the menu of blueprints first rather than the build new menu. I know it did exactly the same in Planet Coaster 1, but I think it'd be nicer if we just opened this instead. And just the way it's presented too, you get this window that pops up like displaying all the different coaster types in their categories. This does kind of feel like it's done an effort to make the game feel more console friendly, because I think this is how it operates on console as well. This doesn't happen on PC. All of your coasters stay at the bottom part of the screen when you click this coaster tab. So I don't know whether there could almost be like a variant in the settings where you can toggle between these different types of menu interactions. But interestingly enough, it works the other way around when you click the scenery tab, where it actually launches with the base game pieces first with the option to click into the blueprint menu. So having this the other way around here doesn't really make much sense. Like I said, it's just a little bit different from Planet Coaster 1, so it's not necessarily a bad thing, just more of a learning curve. Speaking of the coaster selection menu, these thumbnails have to go. They don't really give that much of a true representation of the coaster. Most of them are like quite as far zoomed out shot of the actual terrain, or some of them are like way too zoomed in. I think the main problem with them is that they're not consistent, and unless you learn the actual names of the coaster, it can be quite hard to determine what coaster's what. Like, I think the worst example of this, or probably the best for the point I'm making, is the Vekoma giant inverted boomerang. It's just so difficult to tell what it is, so I hope all of these kind of get like a nice overhaul when the game comes out. Just it makes it a lot more clearer when you're selecting your coasters, when you've got that more visual cue instead of having to read the text that's associated with it. Another thing that I found a little bit overwhelming was more just the sheer amount of menus that there is. It just feels like some of these could probably be more compressed into the same menu. Like all the tabs across the bottom, the 4 tabs towards the end kind of work because it's just more showing you the icon as to what it means, but But the coasters, flat rides and tracked rides, I feel like could, if you just put them as like a rides tab and then click on it and it launches this menu that I was talking about before, and you have like the 3 different categories of rides and then the subsections underneath those, that would kind of make a bit more sense and just make it a bit more easy to use. And talking about ease of use as well, as much as the coaster building and smoothing tools have been so much more refined since the previous game, it can be a little bit fiddly to get used to at first. Like the smoothing forwards and backwards features, I feel like if we had a keybind for these where you just press one key to smooth forwards and one key to smooth backwards, obviously this would be a little bit different if you're using a controller, but that would just be a lot more intuitive, I think, instead of having to toggle it manually each time you want to change your smoothing direction. Also, when you're actually on these coaster POVs as well, they have quite a bit of motion blur from what I noticed. I understand the kind of stylistic feature to give the impression that you're going a bit faster, but this was another feature that was on by default. But I have since checked and you can disable this, so I don't know whether having these 2 features on by default is necessarily a good thing. I suppose for more casual players they might not notice, but considering that the largest fan base of this game is like professional players, if that's the right term, I feel like either having these disabled by default or letting people know that they're enabled by default would be quite good. Also, something that I didn't really understand with the coaster builder is that it was split into edit and construction mode. In Planet Coaster 1, when you clicked on the coaster and clicked edit, that was it. You were in the editing of the coaster and everything that you could change was there. But having this kind of split between 2 menus just kind of makes it a bit overly confusing for me. Either that or I just didn't really understand it the first time playing it, so it would help when I go back to the game in the future, having this prior knowledge of how it works, but just from immediately coming into it, it did really confuse me. But toggling between construction to build the track and edit to smooth it just kind of felt like a bit of a not really needed feature. Also, when you're in this coaster building menu, it makes it quite difficult to close and test your coasters as well, with the actual close and test button being all the way at the end tab. This was quite different in Planet Coaster 1, where you could quite easily just open and test your coasters whilst you were in the coaster editor. It felt like a lot more intuitive to get to this point. I'm going to mention this here as well because quite a few people have been asking me about it. The visual glitches that I experienced when using the different trick track and special track elements on the Outer Max Multiverse coasters, these were purely visual bugs. I'm expecting these to get ironed out before the game launches, obviously, because these were very experimental and new things that had been added, so I can understand why they wanted us to test them as soon as possible. And I'm really glad that they did, because they were really fun. But obviously some of the visual glitches I think kind of made people a little bit nervous about the quality of these ride elements, but you don't need to be. Every element that I placed down, like the trick track stuff, the actual mechanics of it worked flawlessly. I never had any issues with it, it was just visual bugs, so rest assured I'm sure that'll get sorted out. As I mentioned previously about having some more kind of console friendly menus, especially with the game being cross-platform, this isn't like a console or PC port, it's the same game. So when you fast forward and pause time or change the camera kind of orientation, the icon pops up in the middle of your screen the same way it does on console. Now that I've switched to PC for Planet Coaster 1 and this doesn't pop up, I just find it really annoying every time it does, especially when you're trying to record gameplay like I was here. Whenever this pops up, you kind of feel like you have to wait a second before you can let that thing happen, especially if you're pausing and unpausing quite a lot like I do when I'm video recording. So if you could either disable this feature that you would have the visual pop up when something like this happens, or it just not happen, that would be really good. Also, definitely just me being very nitpicky here, I would absolutely love the option to change your field of view. Again, I didn't actually look if this was in the settings because I was in quite a rush to turn the depth of field mode off to get back to my gameplay. But the ability to change your field of view, especially for when you're riding the coasters, I think would be really helpful. I've always wanted to do this and I had a look at like different ways of doing it through Planet Coaster 1, but there wasn't really any official sort of way. So to have this official support for changing your field of view in-game would be fantastic. Another thing I'd like to mention as well, which I'm assuming is just because this is an alpha, obviously like I mentioned a few times, this is not the complete version of the game. As much as the actual default generated supports for the coasters look so much better than they did in Planet Coaster 1, I couldn't actually find any custom support pieces, at least through looking the previous way that we did in Planet Coaster 1, where you go into like the buildings and then isn't like the walls or the beams section. I'd like to think that because the slot is here for them that they will get added before launch, and I really hope they do, because for me in coaster building they're a very vital importance for me doing that. Another feature that I'd like on launch is to do with the coaster trains as well. From having a quick look through the settings, it didn't really look like we had as many options last time as to change out the trains on the tracks. Again, I know this is an alpha, and it also could be an option in the settings where you can toggle more interchangeable trains the same way you did in Planet Coaster 1, but having the option to put any train on any track would be really nice. And speaking of the trains as well, I think this is probably one of the biggest concerns that people have had with the game, but there are quite a few trains, especially the new gen Vekoma one, that are very overly stylized. I do really love the way that this coaster train actually looks on the new gen Vekoma. It's a really nice model, like very similar to, I think there's the Top Gun model that opened somewhere in Asia. It looks fantastic, but we really need to have more plain variants of this as well. I love the overly designed ones, they look fantastic. But if we ever want to customize this, especially with the on-ride, on-train attachable scenery, it will be quite difficult when the model is this big. So if we can have either a really bare bones variant of this that we can toggle for the specific ride, like while you're in the coaster creation menu, or just a lot more stripped back and plain version, this would be really good, especially for, like I said, theming the actual Zero cars and rest of our trains. Also, while you're actually in the Coaster Builder menu as well, the actual panel that appears on the right side of your screen, in Planet Coaster 1 this was at the bottom side, so you didn't really have the problem of things coming off that menu because it was so big, everything could fit. Whereas in this, especially with all the new elements and rides that we've got as well, but even when smoothing with all the new smoothing options, I found quite a lot where I had to scroll up and down through this side menu to actually click on the buttons that I wanted to. And I don't really see why you would ever need to scroll up and down this menu as well when there's clearly the space on your screen to have more of this menu. Either the option to drag the bottom of this window down to increase the length of it, or have an option where it just generally shows more of the buttons, I think would be really helpful and again more intuitive when we're building our coasters. My next point is to do with some of these new features that have been added to the game, specifically with the power management for your rides. I assume this works the same way without the water filtration stuff, but I just really didn't understand it. From how, I did look at it quite quickly, but from how briefly I got to play with it, it didn't really feel the most obvious of how to connect these power supplies to attractions. I know Moomin managed to do it in one of their videos, but I think after having guidance from one of the developers that was watching over our recording session. So maybe some helpful hints and tutorial kind of, I don't know, articles that will launch when you actually press on these certain elements, or Frontier can make some tutorials to put on their YouTube channel around when the game releases would be really helpful for certain aspects like this. Because I think the actual core concept of the power management side of the parks is really cool, because it can give your backstage and plant areas actual features and purpose for being there, which is good because I think it'll encourage more people to build it. But for me, I just didn't really understand it. It could be just being me being a bit thick, but for maybe that to be, I know a couple of other people have mentioned it actually, but for that concept to be a bit more refined and easy to use, I think would go a long way. Just touching on the path tool as well, do not get me wrong, it is great that we have so many more options for pathing now as well, especially considering what we came from with Planet Coaster 1 to how much more advanced the pathing seems in this game, but at the same time it can be quite overwhelming. There is a lot of options for pathing. This obviously will become much easier with time once we've all mastered it and become used to it, but maybe a little oversimplification of this menu could be helpful, where you have maybe a simple and an advanced toggle for the menu, or I don't know, just something that could either organize it a little bit more cleanly or kind of give you some sort of indication and help as to what would be the better pathing mode to use in certain situations maybe. My next point's to do with the weather. I don't know whether this was a feature that had been purposely disabled for our build of the alpha, or whether this is going to be like this in the full release of the game, but it kind of felt like that different weather events happened at specific times that you could actually view in your forecast, but it didn't really seem like there was any, at least for the way I saw in the game, which again, I could just be being a bit thick, but it didn't really feel like there was any direct way to manually change this weather, instantly, which I think, especially when you're in Sandbox, would be a pretty cool feature to have. So whether we'll get this later on in the game or when it launches, I don't know, but that would be a really nice feature to have. Another thing to do with some of the toggles as well, I didn't know whether it was because of the remote access software that we were using to play the game, but there was a couple of keybinds that I obviously knew worked in Planet Coaster 1. I assumed it would work in Planet Coaster 2, and a couple of them didn't. I had a couple of times where I was that deep in different menus that the escape key didn't work a couple of times as well. And then sometimes when you went from one menu to another, the previous menu might disappear like off your screen, so you couldn't immediately click back onto it. And then when you were on the actual coaster cameras as well, like on the POVs when it was in test mode, I couldn't actually skip or pause time as well. Again, these are all issues that are in the alpha, so I'm sure will get fixed in the full game, but I'm just making Frontier aware of these so that they can be fixed. Another point that I've also thought of as well is I like the fact that they're trying different things with the people spawners. In the map that we got to play, in the sandbox mode, the people spawners were actually the buses. And this did also look like it was the case for the career modes challenge map that we got to play as well, although these buses were in a slightly different orientation, so it did look a bit better. I've since learned that these buses were actually implemented in Planet Zoo as well, which is really cool. But this could just be a hint of to quite a few different ways that you can get your guests to spawn into parks. I would still really like some sort of car park management system. I know this would probably be a logistical nightmare to actually like code and design into the game, because there's just so much more like entities and stuff moving and different variables to getting your guests into the park. But at the same time, it would even be nicer just to have some different looking people spawners, which could already be in the game, I don't know, but we didn't get to see these. And I also love the fact that they've brought back quite a lot of the coasters from Planet Coaster 1, like reported them into the game and remastered them and everything. Great, because I didn't want to lose these, but at the same time it would be nice to have some maybe new features added to these existing coasters. Like I was thinking of when I was using the Mara spinner, it would have been cool if, I mean, I say would have been cool, this could be happening in the full game, I don't know, but it would be cool if you could have some sort of elevator lift like the Winch's coasters at Phantasialand. Different elements that we know exist on certain ride types that like ride types from Planet Coaster 1 didn't have, and the ones that have been ported over. It would be cool if these could get like updated to have some more modern elements as well. I think that could be really nice. And then lastly, there was just a couple of little things that I would think would be like a nice quality of life thing to have. Like, I know they're not finished. This was very, very clear to me that none of the drop tracks, switch tracks and tilt tracks and stuff were actually finished, but it would be nice if these could have actual brakes on the track, so it would obviously look realistic as to why the coaster is slowing down. That could be quite cool. As well as in the coaster builder, to add the catwalk, it would be really nice if you could have the option as to whether the catwalk is on the left side, the right side, or on both sides of the track. I think there was a coaster model that did this in Planet Coaster 1, or unless that was mods that allowed me to do that, but if that feature was in Planet Coaster 2's coaster builder, that would be fantastic. I know also a lot of people were mentioning like different maintenance routines for coasters where you could have like transfer tracks to take the coaster trains out of the circuit, like and into maybe like a maintenance shed if the ride's not that busy. Again, I know this would probably be quite a difficult mechanic to add to the coaster builder and like the coaster designer and the way that that works, but if they could get a workaround for that to be a like potential and viable feature, I think that could be really cool, especially from like a more in-depth management, like park management side of the game as well. And this just does feel like me just dropping more lofty suggestions now, but with the stations for the coasters, it would be nice if we had a couple of different options for how the fencing worked on the ride platforms, like being able to toggle this on and on, or perhaps change the size of it so that we can customize it a bit easier. And as well, the actual ride operator booth, if we could maybe have some preferences to where this is on the station as well, would be quite nice. One suggestion as well on the Outer Max Multiverse coaster, the LSM variant, if they could have some sort of like, I don't know what you call it, like a sliding track. I know a couple of the in real life versions of these have like drop tracks, but like that slide sideways. Something like that would be really cool to have. Again, I know that would probably be quite difficult to implement into the game, but having seen some of the crazy stuff that we have so far, that would be brilliant. And lastly, I think the only major coaster model that we're actually missing that I wouldn't mind if the other ones came in DLC would be an Intamin Blitz coaster. I feel like this is probably the most requested coaster model from the community, and especially now that we've got all of these switch tracks and drop tracks and stuff, it kind of feels natural that either we'll get this on launch or soon after, and I really hope that we do, so it can actually use like a slightly different variant of these switch tracks as well to allow for like multipass launches and rollbacks. Again, I think this would be quite a technical coaster to be able to actually implement into the game, but it would quickly become everyone's favourite, along with some others like a Mack Extreme Spinner and a Striker and like an Intamin single rail. Stuff like this will be great to have even if it's after the game's launch, but I think would be definitely essential for newer coasters moving forward. And I'm going to stop this video here because I'm definitely rambling so much. But as you can tell, with all of these comments that I'm making towards like the second half of the video after the positives, I am nitpicking. Like, this game is so close to being perfect, and just changing a few of these little things would make it perfect. But the fact that I'm having to find little things like this to make better in the alpha of the game, just imagine how good the full version is going to be. I really can't wait. Frontier, so far from what you've shown us, you have absolutely knocked it out of the park. Really well done on this. I'm beyond excited to play this when it releases, and I've just got so many things to look forward to in this game as well. Like, I can't wait to get back to some of the coaster models I was building during the gameplay event, and try out a lot of stuff that I didn't get to because of the time constraint as well. We are going to have so much fun with this game when it launches, and I really can't wait. If you have any more questions for me on my gameplay experience, I'm doing a live stream today, Saturday the 14th of September 2024, at 7 PM UK time. I'm doing a live stream. That is already live on my channel now for you to click the notification reminder of if you'd like to. And if you're watching this after that time, you can watch it back as well because I'll upload it as a video. But if you want to join that stream and ask questions for what I thought on the gameplay and certain parts of the gameplay, that's what the live stream's for. So if you want to join and do like a bit of a Q&A thing, please do. And that's all from me. Let me know if you enjoy these longer style videos. They are just me rambling a lot, but you seem to all like that. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.